They never saw the threat coming because I mastered the art of silence. They thought I was a failed consultant living paycheck to paycheck. They were wrong. I wasn't just invited to the Sterling Gala for appearances, I came to own their whole legacy. The scent of frangipani and salt clung to the air as I walked past the infinity pool, reflecting the moonlight like a mirror. The Azure Pearl Resort glowed with champagne light and laughter, a stage built for the powerful, and tonight I was supposed to be the background. Sarah, my brother's voice sliced through the music, still living paycheck to paycheck. Around us guests chuckled softly. I smiled, sipping my sparkling water. If only he knew how many of their paychecks I quietly signed every quarter. The sea murmured against the shore beyond the open terrace, a rhythm too calm for the tension humming under the surface of the evening. The Founders Gala was Ethan's masterpiece, his way of proving to every guest, every investor that he had made it, that he was the sterling heir worth remembering. I had promised myself I'd stay invisible at least until dessert. My mother, Lydia Sterling, had begged me to come. Just for appearances, she'd said on the phone, her tone smooth and practiced. It's good for the family image. Family image. That phrase used to mean something before I realized it translated to Ethan's reputation first, everyone else later. I could see him now center stage under the amber light, his tux tailored within an inch of perfection. Ethan Sterling, CEO of Sterling Holdings, hotel magnate and lifelong narcissist. He thrived under adoration, under power, under control. I'd once admired that. Now I knew it was fear disguised as charm. Lydia stood beside him, resplendent in emerald silk, her diamond earrings catching every flicker of light. When she spotted me lingering near the back, she waved like a hostess greeting a distant acquaintance. "Sarah, darling," she called, her tone airy. "Come join us. Don't be shy." Dozens of eyes turned. I could feel the heat of them, curiosity, amusement, condescension. Ethan's smirk widened as I approached. "Well, if it isn't my favorite minimalist," he said. "Still freelancing? Or did that little consulting thing finally fold?" A few nearby guests chuckled politely. A senator's wife leaned toward her husband and whispered something behind a manicured hand. I caught the word, unstable. I kept my smile in place. "I prefer flexibility," I said. "Keeps things interesting." Ethan laughed. The sound practice polished. "Ah, yes. Flexibility. What every accountant dreams of." My fingers tightened slightly around my glass, but I said nothing. I'd learned that silence unnerves people more than argument. Lydia stepped in as if smoothing a wrinkle in the conversation. "Your sister's always been creative," she said, her smile brittle. "But not everyone is meant for the pressure of leadership, dear. You're doing wonderfully, Ethan." There it was, the quiet, sharp sting of maternal favoritism. I'd once tried to earn her praise. Now I just collected her insults like receipts. As the waiters refilled champagne flutes, I let my eyes drift across the terrace, a masterpiece of glass gold and excess. Everything shimmered. Every conversation was a performance. The Azure Pearl Resort might as well have been Ethan's reflection, beautiful, shallow, and hollow at the core. "Sarah," a voice whispered near my shoulder. It was Hannah, the resort's general manager. Her dark eyes met mine briefly. "Your table's ready if you'd prefer to sit away from the main group." I gave her a grateful nod. Hannah had that rare quality in this place, quiet decency. She'd been polite when others weren't, discreet when others pried. "Thank you," I said softly. "Of course, Ms. Sterling," she replied. "Or should I say—" She hesitated, eyes flicking to my phone lying face down on the table. "Congratulations on the partnership." I froze for a fraction of a second. "You know I read the finance bulletins," she said with a small smile. "RM Ventures, correct impressive acquisition strategy." I smiled back almost involuntarily. "Keep it between us, please." "Always," she said, and slipped away. When I turned, Ethan was watching me. RM what he asked, suspicion narrowing his gaze. "Nothing that concerns you," I replied. He laughed again, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Still so secretive. "You know, Mom and I always said your problem was that you think too small. You chase projects while the rest of us build legacies." Legacies, I echoed, glancing at the glittering resort. Interesting choice of word. He raised his glass. To real success, he announced loud enough to command the room. The kind you can see. Applause followed shallow mechanical. I lifted my glass too, meeting his eyes. Visibility isn't always valued, I said quietly. His smirk faltered just slightly. The orchestra resumed its soft jazz, but a crack had formed in the scene invisible to everyone but us. The night carried on, laughter and champagne masking the quiet power shift none of them could sense. Beneath the table, my phone vibrated once. Mr. Rivera Aldridge, Private Wealth Partnership confirmation call, 9:00 p.m. local time. I turned the screen face down again, but a faint smile tugged at my lips. Ethan noticed. "Who's that?" he asked. "No one," I said, rising from my chair. "Just business." He leaned back, eyes sharp. "Business? You don't worry, brother," I said, reaching for my clutch. "It's not the kind you'd understand." Lydia's voice followed as I walked toward the balcony. "Sarah, don't make a scene." "I never do," I said without turning. The night air outside was cooler, the sea breeze thick with salt and jasmine. From here the party looked small, a glittering illusion of control. I leaned against the railing, gazing at the endless horizon. 5 years ago, I'd stood in a very different room, fluorescent lights instead of chandeliers, humiliation instead of laughter, as Ethan and my mother forced me out of everything I'd built. They thought they'd ended me. They were wrong. My phone buzzed again, one short notification glowing against the dark. Aldridge Private Wealth Partnership confirmed. Welcome to the 20 Bows B Club. I stared at the words for a long moment, then slipped the phone back into my purse. Inside, Ethan's laughter echoed over the music, hollow and loud. They called me a failure for leaving the family business, I whispered to the waves. What they didn't know is that I became the business. The sea breeze carried the words away into the night, and somewhere behind me the sound of shattering glass broke the perfect illusion of control. The boardroom of Sterling Holdings had always smelled like power leather coffee and cold ambition. The glass walls overlooked Singapore's skyline, glittering with money and hierarchy. I used to think that room was the center of my world. That morning I learned it could also be the end of it. Sarah, my brother, said smoothly, standing at the head of the table as though he owned the air I breathed. "We've reviewed your quarterly report. It's concerning." My hands were steady on the table, though the tension under my skin was not. The market took an unexpected dive, I explained, voice even. "The project's still profitable in the long term. I just need—" Ethan raised a hand, cutting me off with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "What you need," he said, "is to stop pretending you understand risk management." A few directors chuckled. The sound felt like paper cuts. I looked toward my mother at the far end of the table, Lydia poised as always in her cream silk blouse and pearls, eyes distant behind her glasses. "Mother," I said carefully, "you know the data. You've seen the projections." She didn't meet my gaze. "I've seen your ambition," she said softly. "But ambition without control leads to chaos. Your brother is right to be cautious." It hit harder than any insult Ethan could throw. I'd worked 12-hour days for 5 years, rebuilt their crumbling finance division, tripled returns for international clients. But Ethan had one thing I didn't, a last name that mattered more than merit. "I've already spoken to HR," he continued. "You'll step down from your director role effective immediately. We'll discuss a consulting position, something more suitable." The word suitable burned like acid. I should have argued. Instead, I remembered the last time we'd fought, how he'd told me I only existed in this company because of family pity. How Mother had stayed silent then, too. The betrayal was a clean incision severing 5 years of my life, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing the wound. So I nodded once, collecting my files, my dignity, and what was left of my pride. "Of course," I said quietly. "I wouldn't want to stand in the way of your success." He smirked, satisfied. "That's the first smart business decision you've made." The men in suits laughed again. I left the boardroom without looking back. Outside, the monsoon clouds were breaking open, rain streaking down the glass towers. I stood under the awning watching the city dissolve into gray and realized I had just been erased. That night I packed my desk alone. No goodbyes, no flowers, just the hollow echo of my heels down the hallway. My ID badge lay on the desk, Sterling Holdings, in bold silver letters, a name I'd carried like a promise now nothing but a scar. At 10:43 p.m., my mother called. "You'll thank us someday," she said gently, as though betrayal were a gift. "Failure builds character." I hung up before she could finish. The following months were survival disguised as routine. I took contract jobs consulting for startups managing portfolios no one else wanted. Ethan's friends in the industry made sure my name stayed small. Unstable, they whispered. Too emotional. I learned to stay quiet, to listen, to watch. One night in a rented office in Clark Key, surrounded by empty coffee cups and spreadsheets, I noticed a pattern in global equity, Flow's small tech firms rising like shadows behind the giants. I started running models. The data didn't lie. The next wave wasn't coming from legacy corporations. It was coming from innovators no one believed in. I used what little savings I had to invest. It wasn't much, barely enough for a whisper in the market. But the whisper grew. By the time Sterling Holdings announced another record-breaking year, I'd already made my first million quietly through Aurum Ventures, a name no one traced back to me. Still, every headline about my brother's success felt like salt in an old wound. Ethan Sterling, the visionary behind Sterling Holdings' expansion. I'd read it once in a cafe that still smelled like rain and laughed, because I recognized the blueprint behind the numbers. It was my plan. The one I'd presented 5 years earlier, rejected as too ambitious. He'd implemented it word for word. Revenge didn't come overnight. It came in dividends and silence. 2 years later, I was sitting in a New York conference room, across from a man with gray temples and eyes that measured worth like a stock index. "You're Aurum's founder?" he asked, surprised. "I prefer anonymity," I replied. Mr. Rivera, senior partner at Aldridge Private Wealth, leaned back, studying me. "Discretion we can provide. But Ms. Sterling, your growth is extraordinary. You've built an empire out of thin air." Not thin air, I thought. Out of humiliation. He extended his hand. "Let's discuss partnership." That handshake changed everything. By the third year, Aurum Ventures managed over $10 billion in assets. I diversified into energy tech and hospitality, including quiet stakes in resorts across Southeast Asia. One of them, ironically, was Azure Pearl, Ethan's prized project. He never knew. The irony tasted almost sweet. Sometimes late at night, I'd scroll through financial news. Sterling Holdings announces record partnership with Azure Pearl Resort Group. I'd smile, sip my tea, and glance at the line item buried deep in my portfolio, Aurum Ventures. Majority stake, 58%. He thought he was the architect. He was just the tenant. The last flashback I remember before the gala was a memory of that boardroom the day he'd fired me. The way his voice echoed against glass. Ambition without control leads to chaos. 5 years later, I'd learned the truth. Control without vision leads to collapse. When I booked my ticket to Phuket for the gala, I didn't plan revenge. I planned closure. But revenge has a way of arriving when closure takes too long. As the plane descended over the Andaman Sea, the sunlight broke through the clouds like gold over the water. I stared out at the window, my reflection overlaying the waves. He thought I'd fallen. He never realized I'd landed somewhere higher. And when the stock alert from Mr. Rivera pinged across my screen, "Your holdings crossed 20 billion. Confirm partnership status," I smiled. "Yes," I whispered to no one. "Confirm it." The sound of the confirmation chime felt like music. Tomorrow I'd see Ethan again for the first time in years. And this time, he wouldn't just see his sister. He'd see his silent shareholder. Years before that final humiliation, the first lesson in failure came earlier. The day I was fired was brighter than it had any right to be. The morning sun bled through the glass walls of Sterling Holdings Tower, washing over the boardroom like a lie warm and golden on the surface cold beneath. I'd spent the night before perfecting a presentation that could have saved the company millions in operational costs. I walked in believing I was about to earn my father's respect. Instead, I walked out with my career in pieces. Sarah Ethan said, lounging in the chair that once belonged to me, "Dad's already reviewed your report." He's not impressed. My father sat at the head of the table. Silver hair perfectly combed, his cufflinks gleaming like armor. "You're talented but reckless," he said, voice smooth but sharp. "Your proposal's too aggressive." "We don't gamble with the family's name." "Gamble," I repeated. "I ran the numbers 3 times. The projections are solid." Ethan smirked. "And yet the clients don't trust your leadership. They said as much last week?" "That's not true," I said, heart-pounding. "They approved my model." "Your model," my father cut in, "isn't what we're discussing. We're discussing your role in this company." The room fell silent. There were 6 other executives seated around the table, all men, all older, all watching me like a student being graded. "What role?" I asked finally. He folded his hands. "Effective immediately, you'll step down as Director of Finance. Ethan will oversee the restructuring plan moving forward." The words didn't register right away. I laughed too softly, too stunned. "You're joking." My father didn't blink. "I never joke about business. I built that division from the ground up," I said, my voice rising despite myself. "You said it yourself. I turned around 2 failing subsidiaries in less than a year." Ethan shrugged. "And yet here we are." I turned to him, my throat dry. "You set this up, didn't you? The client dinner, the leaked reports, all of it." He smiled faintly. "You really should stop blaming other people for your mistakes." My father's tone hardened. "Enough, both of you. Sarah, you've always been too emotional. That's your weakness. You let pride cloud your judgment." The irony was suffocating. He'd always taught me pride was the family's greatest virtue until I had my own. "Dad," I said quietly, "you're making a mistake." He leaned back in his chair, unimpressed. "Mistakes build character. Perhaps this one will build yours." There it was. The verdict. "Security will escort you out," he added as if discussing the weather. "HR will handle the paperwork." The men around the table avoided my eyes. Cowards, every one of them. As I gathered my laptop, my father added almost gently, "You'll thank me one day." I looked up, meeting his gaze one last time. "No," I said. "One day you'll thank me." He withdrew from all executive duties 6 months later, citing poor health, leaving Ethan as the undisputed sole heir. The lack of closure was a bitter foundation for my next chapter. Ethan laughed behind me as I walked toward the elevator. "You really believe that?" he said. "Face it, sis. You're just not built for this world." The elevator doors closed before I could answer. I stood outside the boardroom, feeling the fluorescent lights buzz over my head. My chest felt hollow, not from sadness, but from a sudden absolute vacuum. It was the crushing realization that merit meant nothing, and 5 years of 12-hour days had culminated in a cardboard box. The weight of their combined contempt, my father's cold judgment, Ethan's practiced malice, didn't make me cry. It made me calculate. They think I am weak. They think I am finished. I will remember this moment until the day I rewrite the foundation of this city. The air was cold, but the resolve blooming in my stomach was hotter than any ambition I'd known before. I remember the silence more than anything, the hum of the floor beneath my feet, the faint buzz of fluorescent light, the sound of my own breathing. I walked out of Sterling Holdings Tower with nothing but a cardboard box and the ghost of my last name echoing behind me. Outside, the city moved on without me. Cabs honked, traders shouted into phones, sunlight glinted off the mirrored glass of buildings I no longer belonged in. I stood there for a long time, gripping the box until my fingers ached. My phone buzzed. "Mom." Sarah Lydia's voice came through, clipped and cold. "Your father said you created a spectacle." "I didn't," I said. You tarnished the Sterling name," she interrupted, her voice dropping. "That display was unprofessional. Our reputation before partners matters more than your pride." I stared at the crowd rushing past. He humiliated me in front of half the board. Her sigh was delicate, practiced. Your sensitivity is why you failed. I laughed, then bitter and small. Goodbye, Mom. That night I packed my apartment. Every award I'd earned, every plaque engraved with Sterling Holdings, they all went into storage. The city skyline shimmered outside my window, cruel and beautiful. For the first time in my life, I realized how quiet failure could be. The weeks that followed were survival in slow motion. I sent out resumes, called contacts, even applied for positions that would have insulted me a month before. No one hired me. Word traveled fast in the world of business, especially when your brother ran the narrative. Too unstable, one recruiter said gently. Your reputation's complicated. Complicated meant blacklisted. By spring, I was broke. My savings had bled into rent and ramen. I took a part-time job at a boutique financial firm in Marina Bay, answering phones, filing contracts, pretending not to notice when junior analysts smirked at the name on my resume. Still, I paid attention. I watched, I listened, I learned. That's when I met Rivera. He was the firm's senior broker, a man whose charm could liquidate an entire portfolio without raising his voice. He didn't underestimate me, which made him dangerous, but useful. One night, while balancing ledgers after hours, I overheard him on a call. Words like liquidity expansion, decentralized equity venture pooling floated through the air. When he hung up, I asked, "What's decentralized equity?" He looked up, surprised. "You understand capital flow?" I nodded. Numbers make sense when people don't. He laughed. "You're wasted here, Sarah Sterling." 2 months later, I wasn't answering phones anymore. I was analyzing portfolios. Within 6, I was quietly investing under Rivera's mentorship. Small at first, then larger, faster, bolder. Every lesson I'd learned from Sterling Holdings, the betrayal, the arrogance, the false legacy, became my armor. By the time Ethan expanded his empire into hospitality, I'd already built mine in silence. Aurum Ventures started as a whisper, then a ripple, then a tidal wave. 5 years after the day they fired me, my name had disappeared from the corporate gossip pages. But my company's initials AV appeared in every major financial headline. And that's how karma works, quietly, elegantly, with compound interest. Now, standing under the palms of Ethan's luxury resort, I could still hear his voice from that boardroom, "You're not built for this world." He was right in a way. I didn't fit into his world. I built my own. The moment I stepped into the grand ballroom of azure pearl, the air thickened with perfume and ego. Glass chandeliers shimmered like icicles, and the sound of money floated between laughter and champagne bubbles. It was the kind of luxury my family worshipped, gold without soul. Ethan stood near the stage, surrounded by investors, a glass of whiskey in hand, and his smile as polished as his cufflinks. The years had added a few gray strands at his temples, but not enough humility to match them. He was still the same man who once told me, "You don't have the spine for real business." Now the universe had given me the perfect stage to answer him. Sarah Lydia's voice sliced through the crowd before I could take another step. She appeared beside me, perfectly styled in cream silk and diamonds that caught the light like ice. "You look, well," she said, tone polite, meaning unimpressive. "I try," I replied lightly. "You look unchanged." She smiled faintly, mistaking it for a compliment. "You came alone?" "Yes," I said, glancing around. "But I suspect I won't be lonely for long." She didn't understand, not yet. From across the room, Ethan finally noticed me. His expression flickered surprise, irritation, calculation, then smoothed back into arrogance. He excused himself from the investors and strolled over, drink in hand, confidence radiating like heat. "Well, if it isn't the prodigal sister," he said, voice loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "I didn't think you'd show up. Isn't this a little above your pay grade?" The words landed exactly as he intended, sharp, humiliating. I felt a dozen eyes glance toward me, waiting for my reaction. I smiled, slow and steady. "I wanted to see what you've built." I paused just long enough to let silence sharpen the edge, especially since I helped fund it. He laughed, assuming it was a joke. "Sure, Sarah. And I own the moon." I tilted my head. "Keep dreaming. You're renting the sky already. Lydia frowned, sensing tension but missing the meaning. Please, she said softly, let's not make a scene. Tonight is about the Sterling legacy. Legacy. That word again, the family's favorite currency. I took a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and raised it slightly. To the Sterling legacy, I said, voice calm. May it age better than its leadership. A couple of guests snickered behind their hands. Ethan's smile froze, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. He leaned closer, whispering just loud enough for me to hear, You can play rich all you want, Sarah, but everyone here knows who the real success is. Of course, I said sweetly. You've always been the family's loudest investment. The vein near his temple twitched, still bitter about getting fired. Not at all, I murmured. Some losses are just early profits. Before he could respond, the lights dimmed. A soft melody swelled through the speakers as a spotlight illuminated the stage. Ethan's assistant stepped up to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate Azure Pearl Resort's 5-year anniversary. Mr. Sterling will now make his remarks. Ethan straightened his tie and strode up the steps, basking in the glow of applause. I watched him calm and still as he began the same speech he'd been giving for years, all about vision, resilience, and family heritage. He said the words like commandments. His tone polished from practice. He thanked their valued investors, his voice dripping with pride. If only he knew one of them was standing right below the stage, quietly owning more than half of what he bragged about. As he wrapped up his speech, the audience clapped politely. Then from behind me, I heard a familiar voice, one that didn't belong to the family at all. Ms. Sterling, said a man with salt and pepper hair and a sharp navy suit. Mr. Rivera from Aldridge Private Wealth. We spoke on the phone. I turned, and his timing couldn't have been better. Of course, I said softly. He smiled discreetly. The partnership confirmation went through. Congratulations, Aurum Ventures' valuation just surpassed $20 billion. When the applause ended, Ethan stepped down to mingle, shaking hands with donors. His assistant rushed over, whispering something about a delayed investor transfer. I could almost hear the tremor in her voice. Lydia moved closer to me, sensing unease. Sarah, she said quietly, whatever you're planning, don't embarrass your brother. I turned to her calm. Mother, I don't embarrass people. They do that to themselves. She blinked, unsure how to respond. Ethan rejoined us, holding another drink, feigned charm dripping from every word. Well, dear sister, I hope you're enjoying your brief return to civilization. I studied him for a moment. The man who once thought firing me was his masterpiece. Then my phone buzzed again. The message flashed brighter this time, but done as a verdict. Aurum Ventures, partnership confirmed. You are now primary shareholder in Azure Pearl Holdings. My reflection shimmered in the champagne glass. For a second, the entire world went silent. Just me, the sound of waves beyond the terrace, and the realization that poetic justice had a perfect sense of timing. I set my glass down gently. You should be careful, Ethan, I said softly. Sometimes the people you underestimate sign your paychecks. He laughed, but it came out hollow. You really believe your own fairy tales. I smiled. No, I just write the endings. Before he could answer, Mr. Rivera approached discreetly. Mr. Sterling, he said politely, extending his hand. We haven't met. I'm with Aldridge Private Wealth, Ms. Sterling's firm. Ethan froze. The room seemed to tilt slightly, his grip tightening around the glass. Her firm, he repeated. Mr. Rivera nodded. Yes. Aurum Ventures, one of our largest partners. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't have a comeback. His eyes darted between me and Rivera, disbelief turning into slow dawning horror. His glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the marble floor. The sound cut through the music like thunder. Conversations around us stopped. Lydia's breath caught in her throat. I met his stare calmly. You were saying something about paychecks. The silence that followed was exquisite. Behind us, the sea wind carried the scent of salt and smoke from the fireworks waiting to launch at midnight. I turned toward the open terrace, the horizon stretched before me, endless, gold-tipped and free. For years I had dreamed of this moment. Not for revenge, but for recognition. And now, under the chandeliers of the empire that had once rejected me, my brother stood speechless, my mother pale, and every guest in the room suddenly realized that the woman they mocked as paycheck to paycheck was now the billionaire who owned their paradise. I didn't need to say another word. The truth had already detonated. The dinner had already begun, but the atmosphere remained frozen, chilled by the ghost of shattered glass. Every polite conversation was a forced effort, and the scent of expensive food couldn't quite mask the acrid smell of scandal. The guests were no longer looking at the sterling air with adoration. They were calculating. I had remained at the table after the incident, sipping water, allowing my presence to be the uncomfortable focal point. Ethan had returned 10 minutes later, his tailored tux pristine, his face rigid. His usual arrogance was replaced by a cold, dangerous stillness, a forced composure that was far more unsettling than his usual bravado. He caught my eye from across the table, not with a smirk, but with a flicker of pure hatred. He was no longer trying to humiliate me. He was trying to survive. Lydia sat beside me, her expression a careful mask of diplomatic panic. "Ethan has decided to move up his special announcement," she whispered, leaning close. "It's very important. Please, Sarah, if you have any decency left." I cut her off with a slight polite smile. "Mother, you know I always appreciate good timing." Ethan stood tapping his spoon against his glass, the sound sharp and demanding. The entire room went silent immediately. "Thank you all for attending this momentous occasion." Ethan began, his voice smooth, despite the tremor of his hand. "The 5-year anniversary of Azure Pearl is a celebration of vision, and tonight we announce the future." He looked deliberately past me, focusing on the global investors. Sterling Holdings is proud to solidify its position as a global leader by announcing an exclusive transformative partnership with Rivera Capital London. A strong murmur of approval swept through the room. Rivera Capital was the key to European expansion, a desperate strategic Hail Mary pass. Ethan must have rushed to finalize in the hours since I revealed my ownership of Azure Pearl. He was trying to prove he still commanded the market. Lydia beamed with relief. "See, Sarah," she mouthed triumphantly. Ethan paused, letting the prestige sink in, then delivered his final calculated jab, directing his gaze at me. "This partnership secures Sterling Holdings' future. Unlike the risky, decentralized ventures some prefer, this deal is the definition of real, tangible legacy. A foundation." I smiled, slow and steady, placing my napkin beside my plate. "A foundation is only as strong as the ground it's built on, Ethan." He frowned, impatient. "What is that supposed to mean?" I stood, drawing the attention of every single guest, every eye following the simple black slip dress that contrasted sharply with the glitter of their gold. "It means you should have read the fine print on your new foundation," I said, my voice quiet, carrying effortlessly through the stunned silence. "Because as of this morning, Aurum Ventures finalized its controlling stake in Rivera Capital. Your new foundation is now owned by my firm." The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. Ethan's forced composure shattered, mirroring the glass from the night before. His eyes widened, a raw, undeniable terror replacing the hatred. Lydia gasped, placing a hand over her mouth. The banker across the table quietly put his fork down, realizing the magnitude of the takeover. "That's impossible," Ethan finally choked out, his voice weak. "You don't have the capital to absorb a firm that size." I gave him a look of cool pity. "You spent 5 years believing I was too small to succeed. You were wrong. And now you've signed a deal that makes your flagship partnership a subsidiary of mine." I picked up my clutch. "Enjoy the rest of the dinner, Ethan. And welcome to the future of Sterling Holdings." I turned to leave. Behind me, the room erupted in a furious buzz of calculation and disbelief. Lydia called my name, but the sound was lost in the chaos. As I stepped out onto the terrace, the night air hit cool and sharp. The truth was simple. He hadn't just lost a property. He'd lost the illusion of his own authority. He was still the CEO of Sterling Holdings, yes, but he had just become an employee of mine. The The sky over the Andaman Sea bled gold and crimson as the sun began to sink behind the horizon. Guests drifted toward the terrace, drawn by the promise of a sunset toast. The luxury resort glowed like a jeweled crown, every surface reflecting wealth and illusion. And in the middle of it all stood my brother, still pretending he hadn't just watched his empire slip through his fingers. He saw me walking toward him and straightened his jacket glassy-eyed, the faint smell of whiskey clinging to him. "Sarah," he said, voice forced into calmness. "A word." The guests were watching, they always watched, so I nodded. Of course. We stepped out onto the far end of the terrace where the sound of the waves muffled the whispers behind us. The wind carried salt and the faint echo of a violin from inside the ballroom. Ethan waited until we were alone before he spoke. "What the hell was that?" His voice was low, but the edge was razor-sharp. "You think you can just waltz in here and humiliate me in front of investors? I didn't humiliate you," I said softly. "The truth did." He laughed bitterly. "Truth. You made it sound like you own everything here. You don't. Azure Pearl is my project. Was I corrected?" His nostrils flared. "You've always envied me. That's what this is about. You couldn't handle that I made something of myself while I cut in. Built something 10 times bigger in silence." He stepped closer, the fake charm peeling away. "Don't act like you're better than me, Sarah. You were nothing before this family. You'd still be nothing without the sterling name." I met his stare steadily. "Funny. The same sterling name that kicked me out of its own company. The same family that told me I wasn't good enough. You said I'd never survive without you. Yet here we are." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of the ocean filled the silence between us, relentless and calm. "You played dirty," he said finally. "Partnering behind my back, buying shares through shell companies." "It's called business," I said. "You might try it sometime." His jaw tightened. "You've destroyed everything." "No," I said quietly. "I saved it. You were drowning in debt, Ethan. You just didn't know it yet. Your visionary leadership was running this resort into the ground. Arum's acquisition is the only reason it still has a future." He blinked, thrown off balance. "That's not true." "It is," I said, handing him a document from my clutch, the financial report Mr. Rivera had sent me earlier. Operational losses for 3 consecutive quarters. Investor withdrawals. Hidden loans under subsidiary accounts. I bought Azure Pearl to protect it, not ruin it. He stared at the papers, his confidence cracking, words catching in his throat. You knew all this. I've known for months," I said. "Ever since your board started panicking. They came to me first, not you. You were too busy throwing parties to notice your foundation was rotting." He looked up at me, something dark flickering behind his eyes. Not just anger, but fear. "You think this makes you better than me?" "No," I said. "It makes me free." He laughed once, harsh and hollow. "You and your moral speeches. You didn't buy this place for freedom. You bought it for revenge." I took a step closer, the sunset painting both our faces in amber light. "You're half right. I didn't buy it for revenge. But I won't deny it feels satisfying." Ethan looked away, the muscles in his jaw twitching. "Mother won't forgive you for this." "She doesn't have to," I said. "Forgiveness stopped mattering the day you fired me." He turned back sharply. "You think you're untouchable now just because you made a few billion, 20 billion, I said calmly. He froze. "What?" "That's the current valuation of Aurum Ventures," I clarified. "It puts me among the largest private investors in Asia." "You were busy talking about your legacy. I was busy building mine." He exhaled shakily, running a hand through his hair. "You always were dramatic. Only when the story deserves it," I said. "And this one, it's poetic." The sound of footsteps interrupted us. Lydia appeared, her expression tight but controlled. "What's happening here?" she asked. "Everyone inside is whispering about some announcement." Ethan opened his mouth, but I spoke first. "Mother, I finalized the acquisition of Azure Pearl Holdings. Effective tonight. Sterling Resorts is now a subsidiary of Aurum Ventures." The words hung in the air like thunder. Lydia's hand tightened on her clutch. You bought your brother's company. No, I said softly. I bought back my dignity. Her lips parted, shock flickering across her face. Lydia's voice broke the silence, soft and terrified. You knew about the debt. What happens to the company now? What happens to us? It gets managed properly, I said. And you get to watch. Ethan slammed his glass onto the railing shards scattering across the marble. You're proud of yourself, aren't you? You think money fixes everything? No, I said, voice steady. But it exposes everything. He stared at me, eyes burning with rage. But behind it was something else, the realization that the game was over. The sun dipped below the horizon, the last light fading into indigo. Music swelled from inside as waiters began serving dessert, the illusion of joy continuing for everyone else. I started walking away, my heels clicking against the marble like punctuation marks to a chapter I'd long waited to end. Behind me I could hear Ethan's breathing, ragged, defeated, and the faint sound of glass crunching under his shoes. Just before I reached the doorway, I looked back over my shoulder. Ethan, I said. He met my gaze, eyes dark under the last trace of sunset. Next time, I said softly, don't underestimate the quiet ones. Then I stepped inside, leaving him with the darkness, the sea, and the empire he no longer owned. The rain came suddenly pounding against the balcony glass, like applause from a storm that knew my secret. It was almost poetic the moment my brother's empire began to crack, the sky joined in the celebration. I stood in my suite, barefoot on marble, watching lightning flash over the Andaman Sea when my phone began to vibrate on the counter. Rivera incoming call from Bloomberg Asia. Should I patch them through? I hesitated only for a second. Do it, I said, voice steady. The call clicked. Ms. Sterling, the producer's voice, came through, breathless with urgency. We've confirmed the rumors. RM Ventures has just become the controlling shareholder of Rivera Capital, which effectively makes you the largest private female investor in Southeast Asia. We're running the story in 2 hours. Would you like to issue a statement? I looked out at the storm, the reflection of lightning catching in the window like fire. No statement, I said. Just accuracy. Understood. Congratulations, Ms. Sterling. The world's going to know your name by morning. When the line went dead, I didn't move. The outside world had no idea that the quiet woman they dismissed as a failed consultant was about to appear on every financial headline in Asia. Ethan's face flashed in my mind, his smug smile, his careless arrogance, the way he'd called me pathetic in front of his guests just hours ago. I smiled to myself. Let's see who's pathetic now. The next call came before I could put the phone down. Rivera again, this time sounding exhilarated. It's done, he said. All shares transferred. RM now owns controlling interest in Sterling Holdings through Rivera's acquisition clause. Ethan doesn't even know yet. I closed my eyes. How long until the news reaches the resort? An hour, maybe less. Once Bloomberg publishes, it'll spread everywhere. Perfect, I said. Let him find out the same way he humiliated me publicly. Rivera chuckled low. You are colder than a market crash, Ms. Sterling. Remind me never to cross you. Good advice, I said, and ended the call. Thunder rolled over the sea, a sound like laughter from the heavens. I felt a terrifying, electrifying peace settle over me. It wasn't the joy of victory. It was the clinical satisfaction of perfect execution. 5 years of silence, 5 years of spreadsheets had finally culminated in this inevitable noise. The storm outside was just catching up to the chaos I held inside. I walked to the vanity, fixed my hair, and applied lipstick the same deep red I'd worn the day they fired me 5 years ago. Revenge didn't need to scream. It just needed to show up looking flawless. When I entered the lounge downstairs, the air buzzed with tension. People were whispering, glancing at their phones. Lydia was at the bar with a glass of wine, visibly pale. Ethan was nowhere to be seen. Sarah, she said sharply when she saw me. What did you do? I poured myself water, unbothered, something I should have done a long time ago. She leaned closer, her voice trembling. They're saying you own part of Sterling Holdings now. That's impossible. Not impossible, I said. Just poetic. Before she could answer, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and went still. "It's your brother," she whispered, then answered. "Ethan, where are you?" Even from across the counter, I could hear his voice, panicked, furious. "Turn on the TV, Mom. Turn it on." The bartender clicked on the mounted screen behind us. The Bloomberg anchor's voice cut through the murmur of the room. Breaking news. In a stunning financial move, RM Ventures has acquired majority control of Rivera Capital and through it the controlling stake in Sterling Holdings. Sources confirm that RM's founder and CEO is none other than Sarah Sterling, sister of current Sterling Holdings CEO Ethan Sterling. The bar fell silent. All eyes turned toward me. Lydia's hand shook as she lowered the phone. "Sarah," she whispered, "what have you done?" "What needed to be done," I said evenly. The anchor continued. "The acquisition effectively places Sarah Sterling as the de facto controlling shareholder of Sterling Holdings, with voting rights exceeding 60%. Industry insiders are calling it one of the most strategic corporate takeovers in recent history." My mother stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. "You planned this," she said softly. "All this time?" "Yes," I said. "Every detail. Every document your precious son ignored." The elevator dinged and Ethan stormed in his white shirt, clinging to him from the rain, and his tie was wildly askew. The forced composure from dinner was completely gone. "What the hell did you do?" I didn't flinch. "I simply enforced the acquisition clause that you as CEO approved yesterday," he shouted, voice cracking. "You manipulated Rivera, you lied. I executed a legal acquisition, I cut in. If you don't understand the difference, that's not my problem." "You tricked me into shaking your hand in front of everyone," he said. That dinner I smiled faintly. "You toasted to it, actually." Gasps rippled through the room. Guests began whispering again, their phones lighting up with news alerts. Lydia stepped between us. "Ethan, stop. This isn't the place. This isn't over," he snarled, jabbing a finger at me. "You can't just walk in here and take everything. I didn't take everything," I said calmly. "Just what you stole from me." His jaw clenched. "You think anyone will respect you after this? You're a parasite living off my name." "No," I said, stepping closer, my voice steady as ice. "You're living off mine now." He blinked, confused. I nodded toward the TV where a live ticker scrolled RM Ventures CEO Sarah Sterling now owns controlling stake in Sterling Holdings. Market response is overwhelmingly positive. The crowd around us erupted, reporters dialing phones, guests murmuring, cameras flashing. Ethan's composure disintegrated right there under the chandelier. "This is revenge," he hissed. "This is a correction," I replied. "You built a legacy on my work. I just repossessed it." He stared at me, breathing hard. "You think money makes you powerful? No," I said, leaning in close. "But it makes your silence affordable." He flinched, stepping back, realizing the truth he couldn't undo. Lydia's voice trembled. "Sarah, please, stop this public spectacle. The world is watching. You're destroying the Sterling name." "It's already destroyed," I said quietly. "You and Ethan did that years ago. I'm just rebuilding what you broke." The thunder outside roared again, drowning the room in sound. I turned toward the exit heels, clicking against the marble like punctuation marks to a sentence I'd waited 5 years to finish. "Where are you going?" Ethan shouted after me. I paused by the door. "To prepare for the board meeting tomorrow." "You're invited, of course. Technically, you work for me now." Then I walked out into the rain, letting it wash over me, cold and electric. The sky split with light as if applauding the inevitable. And for the first time since that day in the boardroom, I felt free, not because I'd won, but because they finally knew exactly who they'd underestimated. The scent of leather and cold ambition still clung to the Sterling Holdings boardroom, but this time it was my ambition. The Singapore skyline, now bathed in harsh morning sunlight, looked exactly as it had 5 years ago, the day I was fired. The only difference was the atmosphere. The room was heavy with the silence of defeated men. I walked in precisely at 9, my heels echoing the finality of my arrival. Ethan was already seated at the end of the long table, the CEO chair now visibly too large for him. He hadn't slept. His eyes were bloodshot and his suit looked rumpled. Lydia sat next to him, emerald silk replaced by severe charcoal, her posture tense and defensive. The other board members, the same men who had silently watched my humiliation, avoided my gaze. They were calculating again, only this time they were calculating loyalty. I didn't take my old seat. I walked straight to the head of the table, the chair my father once occupied, the chair Ethan had usurped. I set my briefcase down, the soft thud sounding like a gavel. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said, my voice clear and utterly devoid of emotion. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries. As the controlling shareholder of Sterling Holdings, I call this emergency board meeting to order." Ethan slammed his fist on the table, startling the other members. "You can't just walk in here and do this. This acquisition is illegal, unethical, and we will fight it in court." I glanced at the corporate lawyer seated near the door. "Mr. Caldwell." The lawyer cleared his throat nervously, adjusting his collar. "The acquisition through Orem Ventures and Rivera Capital was executed legally, Ms. Sterling. All voting rights are validated." Ethan stared at me. Desperation mixing with rage. "You used family secrets against me. You waited for me to make mistakes." "I waited for you to uphold your legacy," I countered. "The same legacy you claimed was too precious to gamble with when you fired me. You didn't uphold it. You ran it into the ground." I opened my briefcase, pulling out a single sheet of paper. "The agenda is simple. Item 1, effective immediately. Mr. Ethan Sterling is removed from the position of Chief Executive Officer. His employment and all related contracts with Sterling Holdings are terminated." A gasp rippled around the table. Lydia finally spoke, her voice trembling, stripped of its practiced smoothness. "Sarah, you can't fire your own brother. This is family. You don't burn down your house to kill a spider." I looked at her, the woman whose favoritism had fueled this entire conflict. "You didn't see him as family when you let him humiliate me 5 years ago, Mother. You saw me as an inconvenience, and he was already burning the house down with debt." "But who will lead?" she pleaded, her eyes wide with fear for their position, not their son. "I will," I said simply. "Interim CEO until a permanent, competent leader is found. Item 2, effective immediately. I am freezing all discretionary spending and launching a full forensic audit of the last 5 years of executive decisions." I looked pointedly at Ethan. Ethan surged to his feet, eyes blazing. "You will regret this. I am still an executive. You can't just erase me. I am Sterling." "You're an employee with a severance package, Ethan," I corrected, never raising my voice. "The Sterling name belongs to the company, and I own the company now. Security will escort you out." As 2 discreet security guards approached, Lydia turned to me, her face pale. "And me? What about me, Sarah? I've been on this board for 20 years. "You can stay," I said, watching Ethan being led away. His final look was pure, impotent fury. "You can stay and watch. You've always loved watching the show, haven't you? Mother, consider it your new role, non-voting member responsible for observing the proper management of the legacy you helped destroy." I leaned back in the chair, feeling the cool leather against my spine. The boardroom finally felt right. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about control. "Now, gentlemen," I said, meeting the eyes of the remaining board members who were suddenly sitting very straight. "Let's talk about debt restructuring." Rain hammered against the glass walls of my penthouse, blurring the skyline of Singapore into streaks of silver. I stood barefoot by the window, a glass of whiskey in my hand, watching the city pulse beneath me, the same city that once chewed me up and spat me out. Now it moved to my rhythm. Every stock I touched, every partnership I sealed, every decision I made, echoed through those streets like quiet thunder. But even empires have ghosts. "Ms. Sterling," my assistant's voice came through the intercom, hesitant. "Your mother's here." I turned slowly. "Send her in." The doors opened and Lydia walked in, wrapped in an ivory trench coat, her heels clicking softly on the marble. She looked smaller than I remembered her, confidence dimmed, her pearls dull against the gray light. You look different, she said, scanning the apartment. This place suits you. I know, I replied. Whiskey. She shook her head. I didn't come for that. Then what did you come for? To talk about your brother? I sighed. Of course. She took a seat, clutching her bag tightly like it might protect her from the truth. Ethan is struggling. The board removed him. He's lost everything, Sarah. The house, the cars, even his shares. He's broke, I finished. Poetic, isn't it? Her eyes flashed with something between anger and pain. Don't do this. I'm not doing anything, I said calmly. I warned him. I gave him every chance to act like a partner instead of a parasite. He's your brother. And I was your daughter, I said, my voice quiet but sharp. Did that matter when you watched him throw me out of the company? When you told me I wasn't fit to lead? Don't lecture me on loyalty, Mother. You taught me it's conditional. She exhaled, shoulders slumping. Maybe I made mistakes. But you can't punish him forever. You've won, Sarah. Isn't that enough? Winning was never the point, I said. Control was. For a moment, the only sound was the rain. Lydia looked at me like she didn't recognize the woman in front of her. Maybe she didn't. When did you become so cold? She asked softly. When warmth got me fired, I replied. Her eyes glistened, but she blinked it away. You sound just like your father. That made me laugh, a sound without humor. The man who left the company drowning in debt and called it a legacy, I learned to pay for the debts of his legacy. She stood, voice trembling now. You think this power will save you? It won't. It'll destroy everything human left in you. Then maybe I'll finally understand the rest of you, I said, turning back toward the rain. I heard her purse clasp snap shut, the sound of surrender. I'll tell Ethan you refused. Tell him whatever you want, I murmured. He's good at believing lies. When she left, the silence filled the room like fog. I poured another drink, watching the amber swirl in the glass. Somewhere deep inside, something flickered, not guilt exactly, but something close. My phone buzzed on the counter. Mr. Rivera. Urgent. I answered. What's wrong? There's chatter on the market, he said. A leak about the Aurum acquisitions. Someone's been talking. I turned every muscle tightening. Who we don't know yet, but it came from someone with access to Sterling Holdings' old files. Possibly your brother. Of course. Ethan. Even stripped of power, he couldn't resist trying to claw at mine. What's the damage, I asked. Minor for now. But if the leak spreads, regulators could investigate the cross-holdings between Aurum and the resorts. You need to get ahead of it. Handle it, I said. Quietly. Sarah Rivera said, his voice softer. Be careful. Power attracts shadows. Even yours. He hung up. I stood there staring out at the storm, the lightning cutting through the skyline. Ethan was out there somewhere, probably nursing his resentment, convinced that taking me down would make him whole again. For years I'd built everything on precision, every move calculated, every risk managed. But revenge, I was learning, didn't follow logic. It fed on emotion, even the ones you thought you'd buried. The next morning I found out how right Rivera had been. News headlines flashed across every screen in my office. Aurum Ventures under review. Sterling family connections questioned. Photos of Ethan outside a government building. Interviews. Accusations. His smirk on every channel. He'd done it. He'd gone public. By noon, my legal team was in chaos. Rivera called again. He sold the files, Sarah, to your competitors. They're using your name to question the legitimacy of your acquisitions. My pulse pounded in my ears, but my voice stayed calm. Then we remind the world what legitimacy looks like. I walked into the boardroom, eyes hard, shoulders straight. My executives looked up, tense, uncertain. I could feel the fear in the air, the kind I used to feel years ago when I sat in someone else's shadow. Effective immediately, I said, Aurum will release a full transparency audit. We'll publish every acquisition, every transaction, every compliance report. We don't hide in the shadows, we own the light. But that could expose vulnerabilities, one of the partners said nervously. Then let them see them, I said. That's how you kill rumors with truth. By the time the press conference aired that evening, my voice was steady, my words deliberate. Aurum Ventures was built on discipline and transparency. Every investment we've made stands on audited records, not inheritance. Behind the cameras, I could almost feel Ethan watching, waiting for me to stumble, but I didn't. When it was over, I stood outside under the drizzle, the city lights shimmering in puddles around my heels. Rivera joined me quietly. "You handled that beautifully." "Did I said. "Or did I just make myself a bigger target?" He smiled faintly. "That's what happens when you sit on top of the world. The higher you climb, the more people wait for you to fall." I looked out at the skyline, the same one that once looked down on me. Then I'll just have to make sure the fall never comes. As the rain eased, I caught my reflection in the glass tower across the street, calm, composed, powerful. But beneath the surface, I felt the phantom ache of the first tiny crack. The price of power wasn't just a bigger target. It was the realization that the cost of silence was finally being paid by the soul. I had built a fortress around my wounds, but now, standing alone atop the city, the only thing the fortress held was me. By the time the markets opened Monday morning, the storm had already broken. Aurum Ventures' name flooded every headline, not for its success, but for the whisper of scandal Ethan had unleashed. Screens across my office glowed with red tickers, reporters shouting over each other on financial networks. Did Aurum hide its connection to the Sterling family? Every question was a knife aimed at my credibility. Rivera paced the conference room, phone pressed to his ear, switching between lawyers and analysts. "We're holding at 83% retention," he said finally. His tone clipped. "But the next 24 hours will decide everything." I stood at the window watching the digital chaos unfold across the skyline. I'd spent years mastering volatility. I knew numbers could bleed, but this was different. This wasn't the market turning. This was betrayal branded with my own last name. "Should we freeze operations?" one of my partners asked. "Buy time?" "No," I said. "We don't pause. We double down." Rivera hung up and turned to me. "Sarah, if we lose another 5%, regulators will intervene. You need to let this breathe." "I didn't build an Aurum to breathe," I said coldly. "I built it to endure." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Then you'd better be ready to bleed for it." The next 48 hours blurred into damage control press statements, investor calls, legal reviews. Sleep was an afterthought. Every decision felt like threading a needle through fire. But in the middle of it all, Ethan stayed silent. He'd vanished, letting the chaos do his talking. Until the third night. It was past midnight when my private line rang a number I hadn't seen in years. "Ethan." For a second, I considered ignoring it. But curiosity, that dangerous old impulse, won. I answered. "You finally remembered my number." His voice was quieter than I expected. "I didn't call to fight. That would be a first. I called because you need to stop," he said. "Pull back, sell your stake, walk away before they bury you." I laughed softly. "You tried to ruin me and now you're giving me advice." "They're not like us, Sarah. I didn't think they played this aggressively. I thought I'd get the cash and you'd just weather the storm." "Who's they?" I interrupted, my tone sharp. Silence. "Ethan," I pressed, "who did you sell to?" He hesitated. "A group in Hong Kong. Corporate raiders. They said they just wanted leverage, not destruction. But they're moving fast. They're trying to force a buyout." I closed my eyes. Rage and clarity colliding in a single breath. "You sold your sister's company to vultures for what cash? For survival," he shouted. "You took everything from me, Sarah. My company, my reputation, I had nothing left, and that justifies selling me out." His voice cracked. "I didn't think they'd come for you. I swear." I laughed bitterly. "That's the problem with people like you. You never think. You just want to." He didn't answer. The silence between us was heavy like wet concrete. "Tell me their name," I said finally. He exhaled shakily. "Silver Crest Group. They're fronting for the Sterling Syndicate. They've already started buying Aurum's debt." Once they hit the majority, they'll call in loans and collapse your liquidity. Unless I buy them first, I said. He sounded stunned. You can't, I cut in. And I will. Sarah. Listen to me, he pleaded. These aren't bankers. They play dirtier than you ever have. I'm not afraid of dirt, I said. I built my empire out of it. And I hung up. By dawn, I was on a jet to Hong Kong with Rivera and my legal team. The plan was brutal but simple counterattack with acquisition. If Silvercrest wanted control, I'd make them choke on their own greed. The meeting was held in a skyscraper above Victoria Harbor, all glass and deception. The scent of expensive cold cologne hung heavy in the air, mixing with the stale humidity. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the distant muffled sirens of Hong Kong traffic far below. The light reflecting off the harbor was blinding, forcing us to squint at the negotiator, making him seem both luminous and inhuman. Their lead negotiator, a sleek man in a gray suit, smiled like a wolf. Ms. Sterling, he greeted, gesturing toward the table. Impressive numbers, shame about the headlines. Headlines fade, I said. Ownership doesn't. He smiled wider. Ownership is temporary. Everything has a price. Then name yours, I said, sliding a folder across the table, documents showing RM's new offshore reserves, enough to buy out every share they'd acquired and still have liquidity left to burn. He glanced at the numbers, his smirk faltering. That's impossible. Nothing's impossible, I said. Not when you've already paid in absolute control. Rivera leaned forward, voice calm but firm. You can walk away with profit now or be litigated into extinction. Your call. For a long moment the room was silent except for the hum of the city below. Then the negotiator exhaled, resigned. You're a dangerous woman, Ms. Sterling. I smiled faintly. No, just underestimated. The papers were signed an hour later. Silvercrest backed down. RM stabilized. The markets recovered. But victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like exhaustion, the kind that settles in your bones after you fought too long to remember why you started. Back in Singapore, Rivera joined me in the elevator up to my office. You saved the company, he said quietly. I saved the structure I corrected. The soul might already be gone. The triumph was hollow tasting of burnt metal and sleepless nights. The victory was defensive, and it had consumed the last piece of my old self. He looked at me curious. So what happens now? The elevator doors opened. I stepped out, heels echoing on marble. Now we see what's left after survival. That night alone in my penthouse again, I poured one last drink and watched the city lights flicker back to life, each one a tiny burning reminder that even when you win, there's always something left smoldering underneath. My phone buzzed with another message. RM stock up 17%. Investors regain confidence. I stared at it for a long time before setting it face down. The empire was alive. The machine was running. But for the first time, I wasn't sure if I was still the one driving it, or if somewhere along the way the machine had started driving me. The car rolled slowly up the old drive, tires crunching over gravel still wet from the morning rain. The Sterling estate rose ahead of me, a cathedral of glass and stone that once felt like the center of the universe until I learned what kind of gods it worshipped. The sun was setting behind the palms, casting long shadows across the balcony where Ethan and I used to play when we were kids. Funny how memory softens cruelty. From here, the house almost looked peaceful. Ms. Sterling, the driver, said softly, glancing through the mirror, "Are you sure you want to do this?" "Yes," I replied. "But not for them. For me." The front doors opened before I could knock. Lydia stood there, her once immaculate posture softened by time and guilt. She looked smaller somehow, not in size but in presence. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You came." "I said I would," I answered, stepping inside. The air still smelled faintly of cedar polish and jasmine, her signature blend. "You redecorated." "Your father did," she said, forcing a weak smile. "After you left. He said the silence in the house needed something to fill it." "Silence." "Yes." I remembered that kind of silence, the one that followed every argument, every cruel remark disguised as concern. It filled this house like perfume, sweet and suffocating. She led me to the conservatory where sunlight filtered through tall windows onto the same marble floors that had witnessed our last family confrontation. The room was empty except for a pot of orchids on the table, their white petals trembling in the breeze from the open doors. "Ethan's here," Lydia said quietly. "He's been different." "Different how quieter," she said, folding her hands. "Your father's gone to Singapore. He's there to testify for the ongoing audit hearings." Ethan stayed behind. I turned toward the sound of footsteps. Ethan stood in the doorway dressed in a simple shirt, no designer labels, no watch that screamed status. For the first time, I saw my brother without armor. "Sarah," he said, voice low. "You actually came." "I thought it was time," I said. "You wanted to see me." He gave a short laugh, empty and tired. "I wasn't sure you'd answer. After everything, I almost didn't." We stood there in silence for a moment, the weight of years pressing down like humidity before a storm. He finally gestured toward the balcony. "Walk with me." Outside, the air smelled of wet leaves and ocean. The waves crashed softly in the distance, rhythmic and steady. The sound of something that didn't care about human pride. Ethan leaned against the railing, staring out at the horizon. "I've been thinking a lot," he said quietly. "About what I did. About what we all did. That's new for you," I said, but without venom. He nodded, accepting it. "I deserved that. When you took the company, I hated you. I told myself you were cruel. But you didn't destroy it, you saved it. I just couldn't see past my own pride. I read every audit report you implemented," he continued. "Every reform, every new foundation. You turned our mess into something with meaning. The employees actually respect you. They say it feels human again." "That was the goal," I said. "You can't build a legacy without integrity." He turned to face me. "I was jealous, you know. You always had what I didn't courage. I thought money and power made me strong, but all they did was make me afraid of losing them. You lost everything once, and it made you fearless." His words struck something deep inside me, a truth I hadn't wanted to name. "Fearless isn't the same as free," I said. "It took me years to learn that." He nodded slowly. "That's fair." We stood there for a while, watching the waves. The silence between us was no longer hostile, it was honest. Finally, he turned to me again. "I want to start over," he said. "Not as CEO or rival, just as your brother." I studied him, really studied him, and saw the exhaustion behind his eyes, the kind that comes only when the illusion finally cracks. "Starting over isn't easy," I said. He smiled faintly. "Good. Maybe that means it's worth doing." I almost smiled back. Almost. As we walked back inside, Lydia was waiting, holding an old wooden box in her hands. "This belonged to your grandmother," she said. "She wanted it to go to the one who learned to listen before speaking. I think that's you now." I opened the box. Inside was a single simple necklace, gold, worn, unremarkable except for the engraving inside the clasp, "Strength and Silence." I ran my thumb over the words. "She always knew," I murmured. "She did," Lydia said. "And now I finally do too." Ethan looked at her, then at me. "Dinner?" he asked tentatively. "No reporters, no board members. Just us." I hesitated, then nodded. "Just us." Later, as we sat around a small table with no silver platters or expensive wine, I realized something. Forgiveness didn't always arrive with fanfare or tears. Sometimes it came quietly disguised as conversation over plain food in a house that once felt like a battlefield. When I left that night, the air was cool and still. I paused at the doorway, looking back one last time. Lydia smiled faintly. Ethan raised a hand in silent acknowledgement. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an intruder in my own family. The relentless turning of the machine had finally ceased. As I stepped into the night, the stars shimmered faintly above the sea, small, steady reminders that even broken things could glow again. And though part of me would always remember the cruelty, another part, the stronger one, knew I'd finally done the hardest thing of all. I'd let go. The morning sunlight spilled across the terrace of the coastal villa, painting the marble in soft gold. The sound of waves rolled in steady rhythm, calm and endless, so different from the chaos I'd lived in for years. I sat at the table barefoot, a cup of black coffee cooling beside my laptop. For the first time in my life, the screen wasn't filled with stock updates or acquisition reports. Just a blank document titled The Future Fund. It had taken years to get here through fire betrayal and boardroom wars, but somehow I had made it. RM Ventures had survived the scandals, outlasted the raids, and reshaped itself into something new. Not just a company, but a force for rebuilding, for giving others the chances I'd once been denied. Ms. Sterling, my assistant's voice, came through the villa intercom. "Mr. Rivera is here." "Send him out," I said. Moments later, Rivera appeared wearing linen instead of his usual suit. He smiled faintly as he looked at the sea. "So this is where empires come to rest." "Not rest," I said. "Rebuild." He chuckled. "Always rebuilding, even when you've already won." I took a sip of my coffee. "Winning's just maintenance. Building has a purpose." He handed me a file, the final paperwork for Orum's transition into the Aurora Initiative, a global foundation for financial literacy and women-led startups. My newest gamble wasn't for profit, but for permanence. "I never thought I'd see you trading boardrooms for classrooms," Rivera said. "Neither did I admitted. "But I'm tired of building towers. It's time to build ladders." He smiled. "You sound like the girl I met years ago. The one everyone underestimated." "That's the point," I said quietly. "The world doesn't change until the underestimated start rewriting the rules." We talked for a while about logistics, grants programs, advisory partners, until his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then back at me. "You're trending again," he said. Hashtag, from paycheck to partner. I laughed softly. Let them trend. Stories need endings, even if life doesn't. After he left, I opened my inbox. Among the usual stream of reports and invitations was one email that made me stop. Subject: Coffee Ethan. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it. I've been in Bali for 6 months. No company, no spotlight. Just trying to learn who I am without the money. If you're ever nearby, maybe we could talk. No business. Just family. There was no manipulation in the words, no pretense, just exhaustion and maybe regret. I sat back staring out at the horizon where the sea met the sky. For years I'd chased power thinking it would heal what my family broke. It hadn't. It had just built walls of gold around old wounds. But now maybe it was time to let a little light in. I typed back 2 words. Next week. That evening the villa filled with the scent of salt and rain. I walked down to the shore barefoot, the tide curling over my feet, warm and forgiving. The air was soft, humid, alive. Behind me through those glass walls, I could see my reflection in the window, calm, composed, finally whole. It wasn't the same woman who'd walked into a luxury resort years ago, trembling with rage and the need to prove herself. That woman had been forged in humiliation and revenge. This one was built on quiet resolve. A soft chime came from my phone. A message from the Foundation's communications team. The first scholarship recipients have been selected. One of them wrote, "I want to be like Sarah Sterling, not powerful, but fearless." For a long time I just stared at the message, the words sinking in. Fearless. Not powerful. Not rich. Fearless. That was it, the legacy that mattered. I walked back inside where the table was scattered with blueprints and letters, plans for the Foundation's global launch in Seoul, Nairobi, and Sao Paulo. Each page was a story waiting to unfold, a life about to change. The storm that had once defined me was gone. In its place was something, still something, grounded. Before bed, I opened a new document and began to write, "To the girl who once thought she'd never be enough. You don't owe the world your pain. You owe it your courage. Keep walking even when no one's watching, especially then. Because the quiet steps you take today will echo louder than any applause tomorrow." I saved it unnamed. Some stories didn't need titles. The next morning I woke to the sound of the sea and the faint buzz of my phone. Notifications filled the screen messages from journalists, investors, even old rivals. But one stood out. Congratulations, Ms. Sterling. Forbes named you among the 10 most influential women in global finance. I smiled and turned off the phone. The waves outside were louder than any headline. As the sun rose, I brewed another cup of coffee and opened the sliding doors, letting the wind fill the room. Success used to sound like applause and money-counting machines. Now it sounded like this: the ocean, the birds, and the quiet certainty that I'd finally built something worth keeping. For years, I'd wanted my family to see me, to understand me. But in the end, the only person who needed to see me was the one in the mirror. I set my mug down and whispered to no one in particular, we made it. Not because I was rich, not because I won, but because after everything I was free. If this story touched you, if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told to stay small, remember this